On a morning bright and clear, to my old home I drew near, just a village down in sunny Tennessee. I was speeding on a train that would bring me back again to the girl I left in sunny Tennessee. I could hear the old folks singing as she bid farewell to me. Far across the fields of cotton, my old homestead I could see as the moon rose in its glory, and I told my sweetest story to the girl I left in sunny Tennessee. Well, the train pulled up at last, all them familiar scenes I passed. I kissed my mother at the station door, and the crowd had gathered round, tears on every face I found. But I missed the one that I'd been longing for. I could hear the old folks singing as she bid farewell to me. Far across the fields of cotton, my old homestead I could see as the moon rose in its glory, and I told my saddest story the girl I loved in sunny Tennessee. But I whispered, Mother dear, where is Mary? She's not here. All the world seemed lost and sadness came to me when she pointed to that spot in the little churchyard lot where my Mary sleeps in sunny Tennessee. I could hear the old folks singing as she bid farewell to me. Far across the fields of cotton, my old homestead I could see as the moon rose in its glory, and I told my sweetest story to the girl I loved in sunny Tennessee. Oh, yeah. It's time, folks, for the weekly live Ask Me Anything. How y'all doing out there? Hope you're having a good week and hopefully still enjoying your winter holidays in some form or fashion. And most importantly, finding some time to get more focus, more time to spend with your banjo. And if so, maybe you have some questions for me this week. So, as we did on Saturday with the live guided jam session, our banjo roll call, we opened it up to the greater community there. So anybody on the Play Better Banjo YouTube page who noticed can jump in on these live sessions this week. Kind of open them up while we're trying to onboard some new people into some of these courses and lesson packs and into our Better Banjo Way program as the new year starts heading our way. As always, we have Kelly out there in the Better Banjo antechamber. How's it going?
Pretty good. It's a good day for banjo, I'd say. It's cloudy and cold here, so what else are you going to do but snuggle up with a banjo?
Mm-hmm. All conditions are conducive to banjoing, so we will keep that in top of mind as we move forward today. So as always, I'm just here answering live any questions you have about the banjo, and more specifically, anything you've been working on this week. That any questions that have arisen during your studies, whether it's stuff we're working on together or whether it's your own self-study, doesn't matter. We're here to answer them, get some discussions going, and hopefully we'll all get a little edified in the process. And Kelly, of course, will be manning the ones and zeros and taking your chats and your comments, suggestions, etc., and relaying them to me. I also have some a pile of questions that some of y'all already sent me, so I'll start out probably jumping into those unless you have anything out there right now, live, hot off the wire, Cal.
We're good to go.
Alrighty. So I will take over the feed for now and get going on some of these because we might have a bunch to cover today. We'll see. So the first one I have is a question from Karen, which is good to hear from Karen. She was part of our Perfect Practice Course beta group a couple years ago. We had a lot of fun developing that together. And Karen's wondering, she just has a question about the downstroke part of the chuck and the boom chucka. That's what she's saying. And she says that hers sounds heavy, quote unquote. So looking for more variety. What options do I have for lightening it up? Less sound, fewer strings, other techniques you can suggest? So as always, that's the first step. Identify the problem. Admit that you have a problem. So my guess is, without just watching you play, or watching you and hearing you play, is that if you're on your strum, on that brush part of the strum, this is what she's talking about here, is the boom, chicka, right? If that's feeling heavy, then my guess is there's probably a little too much tension going on while you're striking the strings there. So usually that comes from, for lack of a more nuanced description, usually that comes from just attempting too much control, trying to be too precise with your attack and your hand shape and all that. And a lot of times that comes from folks, when Clawhammer teachers, when we teach people how to do that motion in the very beginning, there's usually a big emphasis on thinking of this whole hand as a single unit, and making sure it's all that we're not plucking from the knuckles, we're not swinging at the strings as we would in a plucking style. In the Clawhammer style, it's more of this whole unit. We're still using our fingers, but we're moving the whole claw basically as a single unit. There are some nuanced movement in there. So that is, I think, probably the reason we all describe it that way, is that's kind of the way you have to think about it to get that basic motion ingrained into your playing. And otherwise, you're just going to probably resort to most people's natural tendencies, especially if you play other instruments, which I know you do, Karen. And you're going to want to move from the knuckles like you're doing a plucking style, but this is not a European plucking style. This is a strike, it's this kind of African-based rhythmic kind of claw style, okay? So you need that in order to get the motion down. And then once you start playing, though, a lot of folks, I think, are attached to that idea that this is a rigid single unit here and I can't loosen up. And so my guess is it's probably just a little too much tension in that hand, and it's probably some part of your consciousness thinking, well, if I loosen up, then I'm not doing the thing. I'll start moving my fingers a little bit, then I'm not sticking to the rules, quote unquote. But of course, it's way more nuanced than that. So I would recommend doing the tension awareness exercise, which we did back in that in the Perfect Practice course. And I've gone through it in a variety of contexts and situations. So if you don't remember how that works, and for those of you out here who don't know what I'm talking about, the tension awareness exercise, you just want to go. This is good for all sorts of stuff that you're working on. It's a great practice tool, and it's a great tool for getting unstuck as far as technique goes, and for exploring what are the nuance micro adjustments I need to make to get the results I'm after. So most of this stuff, this answer I'm giving to Karen's specific question about getting the less heavy sound on her boom chicka is probably going to apply to a ton of different technique challenges that you might have. So you go through the tension awareness exercise. The short story is you play, and as you're playing naturally, as you normally would, you rate how much tension you think is in your hand and your wrist and your body in general, but especially your active parts of your body. You rate how much tension you think you have on a scale of 1 to 10. Doesn't have to be precise, just rate how you perceive it. Then you start intentionally changing that tension. So now play what you would imagine. Let's say I'm playing and decide I'm at a 5. Now I'm going to play at what I imagine would be an 8, and I'm going to purposefully tense my body up and see what results. How does it feel? How does it sound? What are the changes in volume, tone, all that? And then work your way the other direction and start getting looser and looser. So 1 would be so loose that you're just too relaxed to even get any good musical sound out of your efforts, and 10 would be the opposite, so much tension that you can't even really make music. So those would be the two extremes, 1 and 10. And then what you're going to do is just intentionally work yourself up and down that scale. And you can also just jump around and say, I'm going to try an 8 now. I'm going to try a 2. And in the process of that, it gives your body and your mind it gives it a lot more information. You get to scan these various states of tension and lack thereof. And there'll be like a bit, for most people, just doing that will kind of self-correct you pretty quickly. You'll start to either intuitively or consciously kind of have some insight into, okay, I just need to loosen up a little bit right here. So anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that tension awareness exercise for too long because we've covered it so many times in so many places. But that's what I would recommend, and my guess is it's just a matter of loosening up on that part of the strum. So instead of thinking that you need to very precisely strike all these strings on the strum part, it's a brush. I always call it a brush. Most people do. Because you're brushing through the strings. You're not really worried about articulating them in any really sharp and clear way. It's more of so probably want some looseness there in that part of the strum. So feel free to circle back to the beginning of this whole ramble. Feel free to let that hand loosen up. So if what I suspect is true, you're probably unwilling to just let the hand loosen up, because then suddenly you're going to be making those motions that are verboten in the Clawhammer world, at least when you're learning. But you can you can successfully execute the Clawhammer strum with some really loose playing if you work with it, so that's my usual involved answer, and hopefully that's helpful. Let's pull Kel up here, flagging me from the headquarters out there. What do we got?
Well, we have a question from Scott, and Scott is asking if you have any suggestions for getting his pinky to be stronger and cover more frets.
Yes, I do. This is fun. What we've been doing, these weekly live Ask Me Anything sessions for about 3 months now, 3.5 months, and you're starting to hear similar answers from me about disparate questions, but when they fall into certain camps, I can usually answer them in about the same way. So thanks for the question, Scott. That's a good question. Definitely one I've heard before, and one that I've dealt with on my own, and honestly still deal with. And I think most people kind of have an ongoing love-hate relationship with their pinky strength and dexterity. And for some of us, it kind of leans more towards the hate side than the love side, right? So, you figure out pretty quickly when you start playing string instruments, if you weren't already very aware of it, that your smaller fingers tend to have less strength and less coordination. We just use them in less of a primary way compared to, say, our middle index, middle ring. It almost starts from the index on down to the pinky. It almost starts descending in amount of control and strength we tend to have naturally without consciously uh, training them. So the simple short answer is these are muscle systems. They may be very small, but it's just like any larger muscle system. So it's the same way you would train in an athletic scenario. So the simple short answer is you need to do repetitive, challenging motions with these things, in the form of exercises on your banjo. And you want to do repetitive motions that are going to slowly build that strength and that dexterity. So just like a larger scale athletic development, strength building and dexterity building, you want to kind of always be pushing yourself just a little bit beyond where you're comfortable physically, and enough so that in the recovery periods you're going to start building that strength and dexterity as a result of your efforts. Of course, as on the large scale and on the small scale, one thing to be aware of is you don't want to push yourself so much that you're injuring yourself. Usually if you injure yourself from practicing too much in the early stages, it's temporary, but it'll slow down your effort. So you do have to find a balance there. So I'll warn you of that up front. I wouldn't, not to scare you, because it's probably not too much at stake here. But yeah, the main thing is you want to start using that sucker and start deliberately building it up. So the strength and and what I just call dexterity also includes your ability to stretch of your pinky. That's also related to other parts of your hand, right? But that all kind of builds at the same time. So if you want to you could make up your own exercises. Excuse me. You don't need a specific exercise or anything, but you could start dedicating some deliberate practice time to the idea of, I need to build up this pinky, and probably your ring finger too. Could probably use a little strengthening as well if you're having trouble with your pinky. Its neighbor might also be holding you back a little. So there's a variety of ways you can do this, but if we back up a few steps, make sure that you have some dedicated practice time throughout the week where you're regularly, intentionally practicing. If you're not already doing that, make sure that you're separating just noodling and exploring and having fun and jumping from this tune to this instructional video and here and there. That's all well and good, but make sure you're spending some time deliberately focusing on developing your knowledge and also your physical acumen. So assuming you're doing that, now make sure you dedicate a little bit of each practice session to actual just physical development. So in my general guidelines, I tell you, commit to five. A good guideline is to commit to 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day. Try to do that at a regularly scheduled time. Divide your 30-minute practice up into 5 or 10-minute segments of focus. So I'd say if you spend 5 minutes each practice session and you do that 4 or 5 times a week, you're going to see, and you're deliberately working on this issue, you're going to see progress pretty quickly. 2 to 4 weeks in, I think you'll notice significant improvement. So specifically, I have nothing off the top of my head that's a specific exercise for that, but basically anything that's forcing you to use your pinky more. So you could start with just some basic chromatic scale exercises, and you don't even have to be chromatic scale exercises. They can just be like finger strength and dexterity exercises. This is how people usually start, especially on guitar, to address these issues, and that is just play positionally. One finger, let me give you a little better view here. One finger per fret. Doesn't really matter where you are. I'm just going to start here on the 3rd fret. And I'm assigning 1 finger per fret, so I have a 4 fret range here. And so I'm not even worried about what's happening harmonically here, melodically, musically. I'm just making sure that my fingers are getting used to playing an individual fret and being able to kind of hold this position while their neighbor plays its respective fret, right? So I just kind of walked up and, finger wise, 1, 2, 3, 4, and etc. And right now, just so you know, all I'm doing is I'm just using my thumb right now, but with my right hand. Now I'm going to go in reverse. You'd want to do it slower than I'm doing it. I'm just trying to speed through this for demonstration purposes. Save some time here. And then there's a variety of sequence exercises you could do from this idea. I could do finger-wise. I could go 1, 3, 2, 4. Again, I'm doing these way faster than you should do them. But I'm just trying to give you some ideas here. And you could mix and match those up. Maybe each time you do this, each day you do it, you try to find a new pattern. So now maybe I'll go finger-wise. I'll go 2, 3, 1, 4. So that would be middle, ring, index, pinky. And you can get really creative with this stuff. I'm trying to keep it fairly, trying not to get too clever with it because you don't really need to. So right there, I've been playing for 30 years a variety of string instruments, and just doing that demonstration right there, I can already feel it. A little pleasant burn right there because I'm using my pinky a lot more than I normally would. I use my pinky plenty when I'm playing, but it's something that we kind of avoid oftentimes for convenience and for just because it's a rascal of a digit. So anyway, something like that's probably all you need. Make sure you're deliberately focusing on some regular practice time where you're very intentionally saying, I'm going to spend incremental amounts of time each week. I'm going to spend 5 minutes a day, 4 or 5 days a week, and I'm going to do this kind of exercise. That's automatically just putting your pinky through the paces more often than it usually probably does. And I guarantee in a few weeks you're going to feel a lot more control and strength. And that'll start translating to other situations. So just by doing that, now when I'm playing a fiddle tune, say, and I need to grab the 2nd fret with my index and I need to grab the 5th fret with my pinky, it should be a lot easier. I should be a lot more prepared to do so physically if I've been doing those kind of exercises. So hopefully that's helpful, and hopefully that addressed the question for you. All right, we got Kelly back. We got folks.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions from
Hungry
YouTube
for
land.
knowledge. All right.
Yep. So, let's see. Here's one. Hello. As a beginner, should I start with light gauge strings and then work my way up?
All right. That is a good question. And my answer is no. There's definitely no. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to start with light gauge strings. Some folks, advanced players, prefer light gauge strings. If you're playing clawhammer banjo, which I'm assuming you are, since that's primarily what I teach, even though lately I've been teaching a bunch of other styles. It's more standard to play medium gauge strings for clawhammer banjo than it is light gauge, but there are plenty of players out there who play light gauge as well. So I guess what I'm getting at is I wouldn't relate it too much to whether you're a beginner or not, whether you use light or medium gauge strings. The medium gauge strings are obviously going to have a little more tension and a little more resistance. So as a beginner, it might be a slight physical learning curve, but I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. So really, I would say don't worry about it. The time to worry about it is when you've got enough experience, a few months in, where you start to suspect or you start to conclude that the gauge of your strings is indeed impeding the results you want. So when I first started playing clawhammer, I did have light gauge strings on my banjo, and I learned on light gauge strings, and I probably played that way for a good 6 to 8 months. When I At some point though, I realized that one of the recurring issues I was having was related to my strings actually not giving enough resistance to me when I was hitting them. I had a low action, and if you don't know what that is, that's the distance of your strings from the fretboard, basically. And in the clawhammer style, usually you have a little higher action than other styles, and usually a little more tension in the strings. But you could pull it off. People pull it off in all different ways. So I would just go with what you have. If you suspect that whatever gauge strings you have right now is impeding your progress, then keep an eye on it. And you may not, if you're a beginner, you're probably not totally qualified to really make that call, whether it's the strings or just the fact that you have to keep on working to develop certain coordination and skills and all that. So I would not worry about it actually for now, and just keep it in the back burner as something you can revisit a little later when you have more information and more experience. And I'm just talking like a few months down the line, you'll probably have a way better idea, and at that point you can start experimenting with different string gauges. But one of the recurring themes in my mind, and I try to get it out when I'm answering these questions and teaching, is that oftentimes we try to overanalyze and overcomplicate our progress, especially in the beginning. I'm not saying this is necessarily what you're doing. That's a very legitimate question, and most questions are. But a lot of times it's you just need to not worry about it. Pick up that banjo and go. I've had people who are beginner banjo players in their first few weeks of playing who just can't stop asking questions about the tension of the head and the diameter of the pod and the dimensions of the nut. And eventually I realized, some people are just more technically minded, but eventually I realized that most of this is kind of subconscious procrastination, because there's deep down inside we're a little scared to just start banging away on that thing and making the noise. So I wouldn't worry about it for now, but in general, people do. This is a heavy generalization, but I'd say the majority of clawhammer players tend to go for a medium gauge string and a slightly higher action. But there are many different strokes for many different clawhammer folks. Hopefully that was satisfactory. We got more questions out there, Cal?
We do have quite a few more, so
All right.
I'm going to encourage us to
hours.
try to get through these efficiently. You might be here for hours. I don't know about me. But anyway, here's one from George. George from Better Banjo Way. Thank you, George. Let's see. George is saying he's been working on the upstroke technique. And he says, I'm struggling with planting my pinky on the banjo head when I'm coming out of the clawhammer portion and going into the upstroke using the middle finger. My question is, what strategies do you have so that I can plant my pinky more effectively? Should I try to plant my ring finger as well, or just focus on my pinky?
All right. So if I understand the question correctly, some of our recent weekly live lessons, we've been working on the hybrid of where we're playing clawhammer and upstroke. So I think we were working with Bound to Go. Whatever, I can't remember the name of that tune. And you're asking, when you go from the clawhammer then to the upstroke, how do you keep your pinky planted, and/or should you keep your pinky and ring planted? Is that basically what we had? Okay, so yes. I would say don't try to keep it planted. There's a lot of different ways that people execute these moves, but let me say, assuming you're working with that tune that we were playing with. But either way, I'll use that as an example. I'll actually zoom out a little bit so you can see my motion a little more. But you see, when I'm doing that upstroke, I'm actually kind of fanning that. Actually kind of fanning it and really using my whole hand to kind of give me some momentum. I'm using that individual finger, as you can see, to kind of stroke up. But I'm kind of like fanning the whole hand up and brushing upward. So you see there, I'm just kind of keeping that general kind of clawhammer loose fist going and just using, I'm not actually planning at all. I know some folks will play upstroke style and they do kind of have planted because they'll do a combo of like a 2 or 3 finger picking style. And then they'll do these kind of upstroke strums. And so it can be done, obviously. And that is one way some people do some of these hybrid upstroke styles. But the stuff that I generally do and the stuff we've been working on, I just do it. I don't worry about planning at all. So it's not to say that that's a bad idea. But if you are planted and you're doing that upstroke, you might just want to think of it as a really loose kind of a tactile reference rather than a plant. So we're not like planted for stability, but we're just kind of letting those fingers hang and kind of loosely touch the head just to give you a little tactile reference as to where you are. That could work. But I personally actually am not doing that. So you may go back and look at some of those teachings and tell me that actually I was doing that in the teachings. If so, let me know and I'll check that out. Hopefully that helps, George. As you know, you can always follow up if you need more info, if you want to contest my advice there. All right, I got you back up there, Cal.
All right, we've got a couple. Let's see. Here's another question from YouTube land. Curtis is asking about improving inner string accuracy and drop thumb when you have fat thumbs.
Yeah, well, I will tell you that's a good question, and I get questions along these lines all the time. So it's not always thumbs. Often it's fat sausage fingers, big hands, small hands. Over the about 3 decades of teaching and playing, I've heard it all, and I've seen every possible physical reason for your struggles. I've seen them all negated by many, many examples. So my first thing would be to say, let's start telling yourself a different story. The size, shape, and all that, except for in very extreme cases, it just shouldn't matter. And even in extreme cases, you'll probably be all right. I mean, think of people like Django Reinhardt, guitar legends who had a burn accident and had a deformed hand where he basically had 2 really giant clunky working digits on his left hand. And there are guitarists who spend their lives just trying to emulate, even get close to what he could do. I've seen a local mandolin player who's one of the largest men I've ever seen. I think he had to be about 6'5", 6'6", very, very stout, large man with some of the largest fingers I've ever seen. And he could get up on the high register of his mandolin and just play very precisely. And I can't do that myself, and I have fairly average fingers size. So first off, don't let yourself believe that you're already at some sort of disadvantage, because you're fine. But small fingers, fat fingers, no matter what, there is going to be a challenge with those inside strings. And a lot of folks myself included, you're always kind of working to get a little more precision and accuracy going with whether it be your striking finger or sneaking a thumb down into those inside strings. But it comes down to uh, the foundational ideas, which are when you're doing the drop thumb. I think the most important thing to really think about and to focus on is, kind of goes back to the first question. You don't want to be thinking that you're really like placing that thumb in there, or that you're striking that string from a thumb joint. Like, this is obviously an exaggerated example, but that's what we want to avoid, is thinking that we're kind of coming in, or that we're like placing that thumb in there. You want to think about it as the same motion. If you're going boom, chicka, boom, chicka, that chicka motion where the brush is connected to the thumb note, right? So what I call knockdown, other people call double thumbing. That's the same motion as the second half of your strum, right? Boom, chicka, boom, chicka. So the knockdown is chicka, chicka, chicka. Double thumb should be just like a knockdown. So if I'm playing like old Joe Clark, I'll go, in a knockdown style. And the thing that I harp on, and most people will harp on when they're telling you how to do the stuff, is that strike down with your finger has to be connected to your thumb getting locked and loaded on the fifth string, right? So chick, so it wouldn't be a chick, it would be a chick, So that exact same idea is in play when we're dropping the thumb. You may already be clear on this, but just if I make you focus on that a little bit more, it might be just enough awareness and kind of adjustment to give you some positive results. So I'm thinking that all I'm doing is changing the relationship of my thumb to the rest of the claw when I'm dropping. So if I'm just playing on the first and fifth, it should feel the same, except on the first and fourth, I've just moved the thumb angle down a little bit. I'm in a drop C tuning right now, which is why that sounds wild. Here I'm on the first and third, but I'm just trying to think of that basic single unit idea, right? And that if you're really connecting that motion of the stroke, let's presumably the first string finger strike, connecting that with the lock and loading of the thumb, whether it be on the fifth, fourth, third, second, then that should help you a little bit with your accuracy, just getting that technique down. And then the other thing is, this kind of goes back to my very first question with Karen, where I was kind of saying, one of my recurring themes is to go ahead and trust your body a little bit, even if your instruction maybe seems to be counter to what your body's telling you really needs to happen for a good result. So another thing is, don't be afraid to kind of move on this perpendicular plane. This is very subtle, but move on this perpendicular plane to your banjo head instead of always just thinking, right now I was just telling you the only difference is we're adjusting the thumb position, right? But in reality, of course, we have to kind of go around the string. This is exaggerating, but we have to go around the string to get in there. So there's also this angle that we're coming in, somewhere between a perpendicular approach and a vertical approach. So don't be afraid to pay special attention to and experiment with the angle at which you're finding your way into those strings, but then also keep that hand as a general unit and keep that single strike connected to the thumb. Hopefully that'll help your particular challenge. If not, there's nothing Nothing wrong with just going back over those basics and refocusing on that stuff and refocusing on slowing down and paying attention to what's happening versus what the result you want. And a lot of times, just those steps repeated will start to clear up what you need, probably give you the insight you need. I reversed our sides there, Kel. There we go.
Oh, I was handling it.
I couldn't handle it.
All right. We have a question from one of our Better Banjo Way folks.
All right.
Marg is asking, hey, Marg, she's asking, how often do you change strings? She's noticed that banjo strings seem to not go dull like guitar strings sometimes do.
Yeah, that's true and not true. I would say my general recommendation is just change them once a month, or attempt to. If you're changing them every 4 to 6 weeks, I think what you'll find is that they go duller than you think they go. You gotta. It's kind of like the frog in the boiling water thing, where you kind of don't really notice until you get really attuned to these things. You don't necessarily notice the changes as you're kind of living along with them until you go ahead and change the strings, and then you realize, whoa, that's a big difference. That being said, it is a banjo, and depending on your banjo and the strings you're using and just your general aesthetic preference, you might like a duller tone. You might not want a real sharp, bright tone, and some banjos are very capable of giving you a brash, bright tone. So you might prefer it when those strings calm down a little bit. If that's the case, then you're definitely going to want to pay attention. I'd still recommend every 4 to 6 weeks change them. At least do that for a few cycles and see what you notice, because you're going to have to find a balance. Because as your strings dull on any string instrument, you might prefer that tone, but it's going to start progressively losing the ability to stay in tune, and you start having some intonation issues sometimes. You can even get actual physical wear, especially on your wound strings on fretted instruments. Sometimes that'll give you some trouble sliding up and down the strings. So you're going to want to find a balance. So I'd recommend every 4 to 6 weeks, just go ahead and change them. In general, I tell people just change them once a month, and most people think, oh, well, that's so crazy. That's going to be too much, but it's only 12 times a year, and if you slack off a little bit, maybe it'll be 6 to 8 times a year, and it'll get you in the habit of changing your strings, which will improve that skill. That's a valuable skill to develop and to hone and optimize. And it'll also get you more attuned to those changes as they occur. And then you'll start to really, you'll start to improve your ability to recognize exactly how much the tone has deteriorated, and more importantly, whether the ability of the strings to stay in tune and whether the intonation is starting to get a little weird from old strings. So they can cause more problems than just a really bright, harsh tone. But I agree with you that in general, banjo strings don't seem to dull as fast as guitar strings, but some of that I think is maybe a aural illusion because of the bright nature of a banjo. This is fun. We got an onslaught of questions. Pull Kelly back up here.
So this is the last question I have from all of you watching out there. So if you are watching and you have a question, we are likely to be able to get to it before the session ends at around 10 a.m. our time. So y'all go ahead and get those in if you have them. And thanks to those of y'all that have. So we have a question here from YouTube World. Connor is saying, hey, I'm new to banjo and I have a problem. I have metal picks, but can't build muscle memory like that. Should Connor consider that he's new to banjo and that is the problem?
That was my first thought. That was a redundant statement.
Okay, let me start this over. Let's see. I have metal picks, but I can't build muscle memory like that. And then my nails barely make a sound against the strings. I play clawhammer style. Any advice?
Okay. Yeah, so So I think your comment, I can't build muscle memory like that, what you're saying is when you separate that actual tactile connection to the instrument, where your fingers are no longer actually touching the strings, that can be a disorienting experience, that kind of dissociative physical experience there, and it can be tough. Now, if you're a clawhammer player, then most people do kind of go towards just the straight finger or fingernail, the flesh of the finger or the fingernail, for tone reasons and for that kind of feel. Um, it is true when you put those finger picks on, and I talked about this recently in one of these sessions because we talked about finger picks versus fingernails versus the flesh in relation to clawhammer playing. It's true when you put those finger picks on, it's enough of a change. It's not just that barrier between your your actual sensations of, that sense, not getting that sensual feedback of actually touching the string. That is a little bit of an impediment. It can be overcome, obviously. A lot of people use picks in various styles, and that you have to kind of train yourself to get used to it. But it also you have to kind of adjust your approach a little bit with most picks, whether you're playing clawhammer or a plucking style. It's a slightly different, it's a technique adjustment. Now, I'm one of those people, I'll go back and forth and all around, but I do notice if I don't play with picks regularly and I throw a pick or multiple picks on, it takes a moment or two or a day or two to kind of get back into shape. So in one sense, there's enough of a difference in some subtleties of the technique that could be part of what you're feeling there when you try to use a pick. I would say stick with your fingernail or finger approach, and then see if you can start to develop a little more articulation. Because what you're saying is, if I don't use a pick, then I don't have any articulation to my attack, right? And that's common, and I feel that way some days, where I can't really this all sounds just kind of muted and indistinct with my attack sometimes. But what most people do is they experiment with some fingernail growth, but also, we talked about this recently, so I won't dwell on it long, but you can experiment with different alternative clawhammer style picks. This is what I've been using lately. It's Fred Kelly brand, I believe, and I don't even remember what they call it, but it looks like this. Here, give you a closer look. Looks like this right here, and usually has a little insignia there that disappears pretty quickly after you use it. Kind of rubs right off, and then it's non-branded, but it fits over your finger like this, and just kind of works like a fingernail. So other folks, you probably are aware, folks use fake fingernails. They'll craft their own from broken ping pong balls, super glue them on, and sculpt them down. There's a lot of different options, but if you use something like this one, I found is the most natural for like giving me a little feel like I don't feel disconnected anymore if I use a pick like this. This is the first pick I've ever picked up and attempted to use for climber style where I didn't feel like I had to immediately make any major adjustments to my technique, my attack or anything, and it felt pretty natural and had a pretty good tone. It's basically some sort of composite plastic, so it's not the best tone, but it was obviously engineered to sound pretty natural and organic like a finger pick. So if you haven't already, I would experiment with picks like this. There are other makes and models out there that are designed for clawhammer, and they're designed to feel pretty natural. So if you see this one, I can't really demonstrate super well, but it kind of just, emulates how a fingernail would just stick up right over the flesh of the finger. And it fits nicely enough. So that's probably my main bit of advice for you there. If you decide, like I said, I like to go back and forth between all the different modes, using a fingernail or no nail at all, or a pick. It just depends. I kind of cycle through them. But one thing that people have a hard time wrapping their head around once they've been playing for a while is you can get away without having a fingernail and just using basically the very end of your nail and the flesh that pops out under there. You can develop a little bit of a callus there and get a pretty effective attack there. It just takes a little time to get the precision down and also kind of build up enough calloused flesh there to be able to use to get a decently articulated attack. So I'd say just keep your head up and keep experimenting a little bit with some of these alternative pick ideas if you're so inclined. But otherwise, it's something that you will develop through consistent, persistent practice and just paying attention, staying aware of the issue, and just giving some deliberate, intentional, and consistent attention and effort. It'll start to work itself out. Hopefully that's not too vague of a prescription for you. All right.
I dropped a link to Fred Kelly's website in the YouTube chat in case anybody wants to check that out, because they do not just banjo picks, but they do guitar picks and other things too. So if that's of interest.
Excellent.
A question from YouTube land. Scott's asking about suggestions for how to play backup in a jam.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's good stuff. All right. Now, probably, do you have any other backed up in YouTube land? Okay. I might cut off YouTube land because I have a few more pre-questions to address. And that's probably going to take us well past our hour mark. So if anybody else has questions in the YouTube area, I'll get to them eventually. So I'm not saying don't send them, but I might not get to them live today. So the question is backup in a jam. Was it particular to Clawhammer or just backup?
It doesn't specify. I'm guessing Clawhammer though, from what I can tell. Yeah.
Okay. I have a few straight up techniques, and Scott, I don't know if you're inside any of the like the All Access Pass, the Better Banjo Way stuff or not. But if you do have access to that stuff, if you look in the old archived 30 Days to Better Banjo stuff, there's a few lessons in there on playing backup. And I have a very basic, systematic approach to playing backup in the Clawhammer style. I break it down to, so when you say in a jam, it is a little dependent on what kind of jam. If you're playing fiddle tunes in an old time jam, there's some certain conventions there, but in general, I make sure I am adept at grabbing the chords of a song in real time. And once I've got that figured out, either by ear or by looking around or asking my neighbor, make sure I know what chords the song or tune is following, then, catch that. My guess is you're asking about the right hand approach. So I break it down into, for one, there's never anything wrong with your good old basic strum. Really, less is more for good accompaniment. For the most part, less is more, so remember that. So you should probably never feel like a good old basic strum isn't enough. It's probably more than enough in most cases. So first and foremost, make sure you know the chord harmony to a tune or song and stick to that. At which point, so if I'm playing along with a fiddle tune, say, let's see, I think I'm in G right now. And let's say like Seneca Squared or something. All right, let's say I'm just holding the G chord over this. I don't even know how the chords go. Let's pretend it's just a G chord. That is my go-to approach right there. And if I'd played that really quickly, but I'll show you what I was doing. Boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom, chicka, boom. I always just do a combination of straight boom chicka strum, and then I'm fond of doing the drop thumb, what I call the drop thumb roll. A lot of people call this a drop thumb roll. Something where you vaguely, the drop thumb roll as I teach it is you drop the thumb, do the second string, and then you go back to more of a knockdown style, right? So string wise, it would be 1, 2, 1, 5. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'll go back and forth between boom, chicka, drop, thumb, boom, chicka, drop a thumb, a boom, chicka. And I will mix those up kind of intuitively as I feel they align with the contour of the tune, rhythmically, melodically. So in this case, like Seneca squared it. So the bass unit is what I just call the drop strum roll, where you just combine boom, chicka, drop the thumb, right? So I might start with that. So there we have a basic rhythmic unit, and it's got a little variation built into it because I'm going back and forth between the boom chicka and the drop thumma. That'd be like a really baseline place to start, so I could go. And then what I'll do is I'll adjust whether, because there I'm going boom chicka, drop the thumma, boom chicka, drop the thumma. I'll adjust whether I want to drop the thumb that many times. Usually I'll add in a few more boom chicka strums. So depending on the tune or the song and how I feel it should best be arranged rhythmically there. It might be more like boom chicka, drop the thumb, boom chicka, drop the thumb, boom chicka, boom chicka, drop the thumb, boom chicka, drop the thumb, boom chicka. So I'm just kind of rearranging. So I'm going 2 boom chickas, drop the thumb, boom chicka, 2 boom chicka. Then I kind of did a palindrome, boom chicka, drop the thumb, boom chicka, boom chicka. Hopefully that makes sense. So that's kind of my main approach. Start with a basic strum. Never be afraid to keep it basic. Next complication you add is that drop thumb roll, but then make sure you mix it up where it's not always so predictable and maybe aligns with the contours of the melody and the rhythm of the song or tune as best you can. And then the final thing I add there in my basic instruction on rhythmic playing is make sure to get some space in there. Sometimes it's some straight sustained strum. So I just do, my main jam is if you counted it out and analyze it, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, where I just kind of hit on the 2 and the 4 beat, the backbeats of a measure, and let it ring out, and that creates space. Boom, doom, doot, doom, doo, 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 and so with all of these, except the basic strum, the key, I think, is to make sure you're focusing most importantly on supporting the other musicians, and especially the whoever seems to kind of be in the lead at any moment. Make sure you're supporting what they're doing and not trying to hone, get in on, you don't want to encroach sonically on where the focus should be. You want to be supporting the melody. So in this case, we're assuming we're playing along with the fiddle or something. I just want to support that and kind of get in around that melody and really kind of add some more solidity to it. So I want to think that way as opposed to like how much can I do here. So I always kind of start with the basic strum. Then you want to start adding variety, and you can do that with your drop thumb roll here and there, and do that with this kind of I just call it whamming. Do it with some spaced sustained strokes, and then Once you get the hang of that, if you want to take it up a notch, then the idea is kind of be less predictable and start kind of mixing and matching and surprising the listener and the other players with when you do a roll or when you hit those spaced beats. And if you get those few elements down and get them well practiced, and you're feeling some facility in that area, you'll have really everything you need for a good rhythm playing in Clawhammer style, I think. Hopefully that was helpful. Pull Kelly back up here. I said I was going to cut people off, but how are we doing out there?
Pretty good. We've gotten it all.
All right. I'm going to wrap up by trying to answer a little more. Well, I'll say one more question, but it might be a series of a few questions here from Kevin that I got online via email, and then we'll sign off. So let's look at Kevin. I think we might have gotten to some of this. So one thing he asked, it was kind of a conversation we've been having, so there's a few questions in there. But one thing he asked was, why is it called double thumb or knockdown style? Now, I call this thing knockdown. We just talked about this a minute ago. Most people call that double thumbing. I've met a few people who call that knockdown. I don't remember where I got that terminology. It's just the terminology I use. So the answer to that is, in folk vernacular music, you're going to get a lot of different terms for the same thing, and you're going to get people using the same term to mean slightly different or very different things. There's no standards of terminology when it comes to folk music. So that's just the way of these oral traditions and these folk traditions, is you're going to get, it's kind of like in England, they're going to call the trunk of a car a boot. Here in the States, we would call it a trunk. You're just going to get different names for the same thing for different reasons. And sometimes, you'll hear people, I have heard people refer to drop thumbing as double thumbing. That's usually just kind of a mental slip, I think, but that is something I have heard some people do. So sometimes you'll get this terminology, it just gets a little confused, but that is the folk way. So it's just good to try to make sure you kind of have that connection and you understand, like, I'm going to call it knockdown as well as a few other people. Most people will call that double thumbing for whatever reason. And then he was going on to ask about, he's making some progress through some knockdown exercises that we had in the walk up and connector studies in the Clawhammer 101 course. And Kevin went on to say, I'm certainly slower and more intentional when I add in the filler notes. Things in my mind are, 1, I want to make sure I'm not giving the filler note too much time. Okay, so what he's talking about is, in this type of exercise, we're doing boom chickas, and then we're doing these walk up and connectors to connect chords and make it more interesting. And we're doing a knockdown double thumb kind of approach. And his question, it's more of a comment, is, he's trying to make sure he's not giving too much time to those filler notes. So it's a question of how does that work out? Because the idea with this exercise is to get you to be able to play something like that kind of spontaneously, have it internalized, or you can just kind of... So that would be the next thing you would add, to go back to the previous question, to your rhythmic studies or accompaniment studies, is you can put some little walk-ups and fillers in between your chord changes, and that'll really complete your repertoire as a accompanying player. So that's what these exercises are about. And his question is, how do I know if I'm assigning too much time value to those filler notes? I'll give you a technical answer in a second, but the best answer to that is to listen to my examples of these particular exercises, but also listen to other players as much as you can. I'm sure you're already doing that, but give that critical listen, because the more you hear it, the more you can internalize that, and you won't even have to think consciously about how much time value to assign to these notes in between your chord strums. But the technical answer would be, I'm going to pull up, let's see. Well, I don't have it on me right now, but I know, like, so the way I write out those exercises in quarter notes and eighth notes. So boom, chicka, it's like quarter, eighth, eighth, quarter, eighth, eighth. Then the in between notes, when we're not doing a knockdown style, those are all quarter notes. So let's say we're going from a G chord to a C chord. Boom. Alright, so we're just going to go boom, 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 which is probably in those exercises that you're referencing. A 3-note boom note connection between the G and the C chord. If I'm just playing those straight boom notes, those are quarter notes. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Each one of those connector notes would get a single count. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4. And when we're doing the knockdown, it's really, you can think of it the same way, but all we're doing is we're filling in the space in between. So technically now it would be 1 and 2 and 3 and... Alright, so technically now those boom notes become eighth notes because we're going to encroach upon them with that little thumb note. So you could count it, if you want to count these out, it'd be like the basic strum would be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... See how that would work? 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and... Okay, hopefully that makes sense. You might have to slow me down, but you can slow this video down if you need that to be demonstrated in a little slower time value. That you might already understand all that, and if so, you might just be asking like more about the feel of how to fit those in and kind of get the phrasing correct. But again, that would go back to just playing them enough to where it's fairly programmed in there, so you're not thinking too much about the logistics and mechanics of executing that particular musical passage. You can think more about the expression and the nuance of the phrasing. At that point, it just comes down to hearing in your head how you want it to be phrased. So think of it as the language analogy. This is something like if you're learning phrases in a foreign language, first you just have to kind of learn them in a stilted way where you're not maybe pronouncing them with the exact accent and inflection that a native speaker would. Once you're functional with them, then you can start to play around with those nuances and really getting the accent on there and trying to speak more fluently like a native speaker. And you'll also, the more you're listening and intentionally and attempting to do this, the more you'll kind of hear it, and you'll know what you're trying to reproduce, which will make it easier to do so. Hopefully that makes sense. And let's see, the other thing you had, one other question. On third and fourth string, I tend to pluck in on the string rather than down. Is this bad? I want to make sure I'm not getting into lazy bad habits from that or any other standpoint. And this, I actually addressed both of these already earlier in this video. But no, that's not bad. And first of all, we'll start in reverse. First of all, I talked about this earlier today. There's a balance between worrying about developing bad habits and just kind of pushing forward and letting your body and your intuition kind of guide you. Have trust and faith in what you're hearing and seeing and feeling. And then, of course, do this. Check back in with me or whoever your mentor is and make sure that if you are starting to veer off the path in a dangerous way, they'll kind of push you back into the middle of the road. But it's usually not in much danger of getting too far off the road if you're really paying attention and if you're even concerned about, if this is a concern on top of mind, then you're probably already given enough attention and awareness that you probably intuitively already going to know when you're way off course. But to answer specifically that question, there is a little bit of a sideways approach. And I actually talked about earlier, just kind of assuming that might have been an issue that one of the question askers was having. We describe this motion as a purely vertical motion, but when you're dropping the thumb, and he's talking about maybe not even dropping the thumb, maybe he's talking about striking with his striking finger. Either way, there is a bit of it is a hybrid of coming in perpendicularly and vertically. There's a hybrid there. So there's a little bit of an angle that has to happen. Even though conceptually we might just think of it as kind of more of a vertical motion. But yeah, the reality is you are going to have to kind of come in from the side to a certain degree. So that's where I say, go ahead and don't worry about the specific verbiage of instruction that I or other people have given you that might make you feel like, well, I can't do that because the motion is supposed to be exactly like this. Go ahead and get a little free with it and make the minute micro adjustments that need to happen to get the results you're after. And then since Kevin is in some of our courses and we talk online here and there, he'll send me a video to make sure I can look and I can let him know, like, oh yeah, actually that does look like you're traveling down the wrong path, or vice versa. So yeah, you're fine, keep it going. So that's one of the themes today is in the moment, trust your intuition and the knowledge you have up to this point, and your ability to kind of feel intuitively whether you can make a micro adjustment or not, and then check in at your convenience with somebody who can help you decide if you're on the right path or not. But definitely don't be afraid to experiment with this stuff, because that's where you're going to learn a lot, is learning to kind of trust your own body and your own intuition while you experiment with the nuances of executing these maneuvers and developing the specific skills you're after. All right, I think we can wrap that up. This has been a lot of fun. He had one more question, and this will go with a final note. This was a specific question. He was asking if I had a Christmas lesson pack, Christmas tunes, and he was saying he understand since you moved to the Better Banjo Way system last year, you might not. But two things: I do have about 4 or 5 Christmas and winter holiday tunes I had arranged over the years, and those are all available. I think a lot of those you can find online, but they are available inside the Better Banjo Way. And this thing we're doing right now is something we do weekly in the Better Banjo Way. Just kind of opened it up this week because I'm hoping to get more people to check out the Better Banjo Way and get on board. And what that is it's access to every lesson, course, lesson pack, everything at Play Better Banjo, and all the tabs, charts, and all that. We're building up a big reference library full of charts of scales and chord shapes and all sorts of different ideas and all sorts of different tunings. And also we do 3 weekly live events like this. We do Q&A, we do live weekly lesson, which we'll be doing tomorrow, and we do a live weekly guided jam session. And then monthly we do a little more on we add our Banjo Connection session, where we try to go a little deeper, a little more interactive, and all that combines in with all the lesson materials. And I help you try to guide you on your own personal path too, and give you as much personal guidance as you might request. We also have inside the Better Banjo Way community. Let's see if I can pull this up. Da-da-da. We also have let's see here. This area, our own little community area, where we do auxiliary stuff. We have conversations up in here. I do a lot of follow-ups to our lessons. We were studying Charlie Poole a month or so ago, and then I would come in here and maybe add in some extra follow-up to the lessons. Or at one point we were studying Ola Belle Reed, or we were doing 2-finger style stuff. We did Old Reads Undone in Sorrow, and then we started talking about it back in this area, and somebody wanted Clawhammer, so I threw that up there. We do other little studies that are a little more philosophical, and we just have a good old time up in here. Another thing I've been having fun with in our little private community area, haven't done this in a little while, I'll probably get back to it in the next couple of weeks, is I'll go ahead and I will do a full, I'll just let you watch as I do a full transcription. So you might get a 50, 60-minute video where I'm walking through the process of transcribing a tune and showing you the screen, showing you my tab as I build it. You get to watch me kind of listen and try to pick out what key a recording is in and what the individual passages are. And a lot of people found that really helpful. Various stuff like that. And then Kelly, of course, helps us with our live stuff as well. And so anyway, if you're interested in that, you should see that down in the description. There's links to that, and that's got a little sale going at the end of this, for the end of the year here, for another couple days. And otherwise, all our regulars, we will see you tomorrow at the weekly live lesson. And I'm just going to surprise you on that, what the subject matter is going to be. I'll try to have it be something appropriate as our year-end wrap-up lesson. And anything to add there, Cal?
Other than a big Happy New Year to everybody. Cheers.
Yeah, that was a good, fun, epic session. We'll see you tomorrow.